Hello students, welcome back. And today we are going to talk about cross-media ownership. Now you might be thinking, but the lecture is about convergence. Convergence is directly related to the concept of cross-media ownership. It is Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, also known as TRAI, who identified cross-media ownership as problematic. So what exactly is cross-media ownership? Before I explain you in simple words, let's go on to a more authentic definition of cross-media ownership. Cross-media ownership of media particularly refers to companies who own more than one type of media company. For example, more than one television station, radio station, newspaper, magazine publisher, book publisher, cable company. However, all of this in one specific market. Now let me explain to you in a more simple terms, right? So cross-media ownership is, say, supposedly I am a media owner in the sense that I own a media business. However, my media business is across various media industries. Now, across various media industries meaning, so say suppose I am a film producer, so I produce films. At the same point of time, I have a magazine which belongs to me. I also produce content for television. I might own a television channel. I might own a book publishing house. So it's the same person, but I have multiple media holdings. So when one organization or one entity has multiple media holdings, it is inherently known as cross-media ownership. So cross-media ownership is problematic. And Ben Bagdikian states that in the world media scene, the number of such entities who have cross-media ownership, and such entities are referred as conglomerates, right? Why? Because they have multiple media holdings. So such conglomerates are declining every day. And you know, this is not something which is hidden. I mean, today is the time of acquisitions and mergers. So whether we talk about conglomeration or whether we're talking about concentration of ownership, whether we are talking about cross-media ownership, inherently we are talking about mergers and acquisitions. As a result of this multiple mergers and acquisition, what has happened is that in current times, the number of media conglomerates have reduced. Right? And according to Ben Bagdikian, there are now only 6 media corporations that account for more than half of the world media business. Isn't it alarming, students? Of course it is, right? So which are they? They are AOL, they are Time Warner, News Corporation, Disney, Bertelsmann, Viacom, Vivendi, Universal. So it is few organizations such as these which have, holdings, world media holdings of more than 60%. Now, I often tell my students in the offline class also that, when I'm talking about 6 organizations or 7 organizations or whatever, I mean, even if it's like a 10 or 12 in totality, then even though we are talking about organizations, ultimately who owns the organization? Right? Even though there are board of directors and so on and so forth, but ultimately an organization is often headed by one person. This is extremely alarming to even think of, that 60% of world media holdings are so on and so forth in the hands of a few people, right? 6 or 7 or 8 people. This is extremely alarming according to me. There's another report commissioned by Information and Broadcasting Ministry of India's Administrative Staff College of India. So commissioned by Information and Broadcasting Ministry to Administrative Staff College of India, Hyderabad. And according to their report, and of course this is an old report, but you can refer to the new reports as well. For the year 2008 and 9, it was clearly established that Indian media is also plagued by cross-media ownership, concentration of ownership, right? And this is something I'm talking about 8, 9, 10. So of course, sitting here in 2022 with the ever-expanding mergers and acquisitions, you can imagine the state of the Indian media industry. However, this is something which is less talked about, I feel, both in the academic scenario as well as in the common press. Now, again, to understand this cross media ownership, there are two kinds of ownership involved here, or there are kind of two kinds of concentration which is happening. Number one is vertical integration and number two is horizontal integration. So before we go further, we'll talk about what is vertical integration and what is horizontal integration. In order to explain you this, I will take the example of the Bollywood industry, the Hindi film industry. So what is vertical integration? Now say suppose I am a person who owns a production house. So inherently I make films, right? I produce films in that sense. Now I am the same entity who along with producing films is also into film distribution. What is film distribution? Where I distribute the film across territories, across states, so that the film reaches from the hands of the producer to the hands of the exhibitor. Now at the same point of time, I am also an entity who owns multiple theatres. So in this scenario, my company is vertically integrated. It is a media company. It is of course a media company. All of these three branches are parts of the film business, production, distribution and exhibition. Nonetheless, I have holdings across all the verticals, making my company a vertically integrated company, right? And horizontal integration is the other way around. Horizontal integration is, say suppose, but here let me not give you an example, an imaginary example, but let me give you the example of Shah Rukh Khan's company, which is Red Chillies Entertainment. Now Red Chillies Entertainment is, what is Red Chillies Entertainment? Right, it is a production house, you can say that, because it produces films. It's a VFX company because it does VFX for its films, for other films in the industry. It kind of produces live shows also. For a particular period of time, it was creating television shows. So basically, it is the same organization, but it has holdings across media ownership, which we were referring as the cross media ownership, right? Another example of cross media holding would be Yash Raj Films. So Yash Raj Films, if you go into the website of Yash Raj Films, and let me show you that, you can see here that it has holdings across media industries, right? So it's not just a film production company. At the same point of time, it is also again a VFX company. It also, it's a music company because its licenses, as in it kind of has multiple holdings in that sense, and so on and so forth. So it is, you can see the gamut of ownership which say Yash Raj Films has. Now these kind of ownerships are very popular in media industries. Both vertical integration and horizontal integration is extremely popular in Indian media industry, but it inherently leads to what you call as concentration of ownership. At this point of time, I have a small question for you. I want you to think about two media companies, one which is vertically integrated and another which is horizontally integrated. Students, let me begin with the answer of it. Now, of course, the example of a vertical media company would be something like a PVR. PVR, as you all know, is a production company. However, it also distributes films in certain cases, not always, but in certain cases. And at the same point of time, we all know that it's an exhibitor. So it's an integrated company. However, as in the case of Yash Raj Films or as in the case of Red Chillies, though Red Chillies distributed just one film, Yash Raj Films also can be called a vertically integrated company because even though it does not have theatres of its own, it is kind of producing films as well as distributing films. So it's an integration on a certain scale. Now, interestingly, the other one, which is the cross-media ownership, which we find extremely problematic, or what leads to concentration of ownership, or what is referred as horizontal integration, is not just in the purview of say film industry, but then it is there across the media industries. And among the innumerable examples which I can give, because the purview of this lecture limits me that is, I have to be limited in my discussions. So I would like to talk about the Indian television industries and the kind of convergence involved, or which is very which surfaces in the Indian television industry. Now, of course, when we are talking about Indian television industry, I would like to talk about Star and Zee. Right, not going too much into the history of Star and Zee, we all know that 1990s led to the privatization of the market, and this was at this point of time a lot of foreign entities, a lot of foreign players kind of entered our industry. So if you go to Star, Star is a 1991 Hong Kong based company, Satellite Television Asian Region, that was the full form. Right, and it started, it started beaming as a channel with satellite services in India. In 1993, Rupert Murdoch, now remember this name because this name is kind of almost synonymous to the idea of cross-media ownership. Rupert Murdoch acquired Star, and from then onwards, it became a Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation's media empire. News Corporation, what is News Corporation? News Corporation is a media empire, again synonymous to the idea of cross-media ownership. And interestingly, this, when we're talking about Murdoch's empire and when we're talking about cross-media ownership and media holdings, it's transnational media holdings. So nowadays, cross-media ownership is not, say, suppose till now I was giving you example of Yash Raj Films. Yash Raj Film is an Indian company, Indian private limited company. And I was telling that Yash Raj Films has ownership across VFX and TV production and so on and so forth. But now what we are talking about is in much larger scale, right? So number one, why is it called, I'm calling it in a much larger scale? Because number one, it's transnational and the number of media holdings are, innumerable, right? And of course, you should, after this lecture, go ahead and read about the Rupert Murdoch's media empire, so to say. Now, News Corporation is a US-based conglomerate whose US holdings include most notably Fox Network, 20th Century Fox Studios, cable channels, HarperCollins book publisher, New York Post, among many others. Its global media holdings are far more extensive. It has been specially successful in satellite television such as Dish TV in North America, B-Sky B in Europe, Foxtel in Australia, Star TV across the full expanse of Asia. And of course, you are aware of the expanse of Star TV. According to the CEO, Rupert Murdoch, now this is interesting and I highlight what I'm saying, the company's satellite system and the television channel reaches more than 3/4 of Earth's population. Star India's Rupert Murdoch-led News Corporation, the Indian subsidiary, is at present a leading media and entertainment company in India, and its portfolio includes 32 channels and more. Again, isn't this alarming? Of course it's alarming. We are talking about Rupert Murdoch's empire. So this one man is so powerful that, because of his multiple media holdings, because of his transnational multiple media holdings, that if he has an opinion, if he has something to say, he can quickly reach, he can immediately reach out to almost 3/4 of Earth's population. You can imagine for yourself, students, how powerful this man is. And of course, there's another example, Zee TV. Zee TV is owned by our very own, because it's an Indian company. So Indian entrepreneur Subhash Chandra Goyal, who owns the Zee TV enterprise, right? And it has more than 30 channels, including Zee TV, Zee Cinema, Zing, Zee Premiere. The list is again endless. Of course, I can chart down a few more examples for you. So, for example, Times Group, owned by Bennett and Coleman and Company. It has holdings across print, Times of India, the second largest circulated daily newspaper in India, 15 other newspaper and magazines, Radio Mirchi across 32 cities, TV News, TV Entertainment. Other examples of media conglomerates would be India Today Group, would be Network 18, and again, you can yourself do some little research and figure out the number of such companies who have multiple media holdings. Now, why is this problematic? Data is not important here. It's readily available in the internet as well. But again, this data is, I mean, again, with caution, I'll just tell you this, even though I did give you some data, this data is extremely fluctuating because the mergers and acquisitions and the buying and selling of these media companies are just happening on almost on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. So perhaps some of the data I have given you might have changed by the time I have written this research paper and by the time I'm delivering this lecture. This paper was published a little while back in 2015 in the Wesleyan Journal of Research, right? And I'm giving this lecture in 2022, so some of the data might have changed. But nonetheless, the idea remains the same, the idea that cross-media ownership is problematic. Now let us go a little further away from the data and talk about what are the repercussions of the cross-media ownership. And in order to talk about it, I would like to talk about public sphere, the term coined by Jürgen Habermas, right, in his influential book, The Structural Transformation of Public Sphere. Now, what is public sphere? Public sphere, and I'm quoting here, is a discursive space in which individuals and groups congregate to discuss matters of mutual interest and, where possible, to reach a common judgment. He further states that when a public is large, this kind of communication requires certain means of dissemination and influence. Today, newspapers, periodicals, radio, and television are the media of the public sphere. Thus, media creates what Habermas calls a public sphere, which enables discussion on issues vital to the society and thus helps in formation of public opinion. And this is the term which I would want to focus on, public opinion. Public opinion, as we all know, even in common parlance, is often formulated by media. And when this media is owned by a certain group of people, and I'm referring to them as people, of course they are organizations, but then ultimately they are people. So when this media is owned by only a certain handful of people, then it is problematic. Because then this public sphere is basically mediated by the ideas and the opinions of only a small handful of people. You yourself think about it. Isn't it problematic? Of course it is, right? And when I say public opinion, we actually formulate all kind of opinions from watching things on television. I'm giving you the example of television, but then this is true for all sorts of media, right? So our understanding of our way of life, our understanding of what is the most important news for the day, our understanding of what is good for our health and what is bad for our health, our understanding of the world around us is basically, media has a very, very important role to play in that. And when this when this goes into the hands of a certain few number of people, which is basically cross-media ownership, right, then it becomes problematic. Now, till now, when I was speaking about the problems associated with cross-media ownership, I was talking about, in general parlance, we spoke about public sphere and so on. Now, let's focus on news, right? Because, of course, news comes into the ambit, or when you talk about formation of public opinion, news or day-to-day news which we watch on television, and here I'm particularly refer to television news, is an important medium for us to formulate our opinions. It is often called the fourth estate, and the watchdog. It's often called the watchdog of the society. The news media is expected to have larger concerns about the society, and it should not, ideally, should be in the hands of market and competitive concerns. But who owns news, right? This is a question which should bother ideally all of us. Who is the owner of news? Of course, the owner of news, so to say, and no matter how much we say that it's the fourth estate and all journalists or everybody involved in the news media business should be outside the market. Nonetheless, it is not outside the market, right? There is a business side to the news media involved, right? So it is either be it the subscription model or be it the advertising model. All of these models somewhere are problematic. Problematic in the sense because it does not leave news media outside the purview of the market. Now, what is the answer to it? Should we go back to the Doordarshan times when there was only one television channel, and then we all had news, whatever we could hear from Doordarshan or AIR as a matter of fact? But then that was also problematic. That's because when that is the case, then your news is in the hands of the government. It is not an independent status in that sense. So either it's in the hands of the government or in the hands of the market. Now, of course, in today's date, it's in the hands of the market because we all know that we are not no more in the times of Doordarshan. Now, in this market scenario, right, if the market has multiple players, then there is always healthy, two things does happen. One is there is always healthy competition, but at the same point of time, we get diverse opinion, right? When there are only very few players in the market, then this news becomes the spokesperson of only few handful of people or handful of organizations. So this is basically the problem when it comes to concentration of ownership, particularly in the news media. Now, I want to chart out, before we kind of close this lecture, a few of the other problems which are kind of a direct repercussion of concentration of ownership. One is the homogenization or the absence of the other in Indian news media. What do I mean by the absence of other? When you watch news media, right, you will often see that the maximum number of news comes from Delhi or from other metropolitan cities. Whereas the other, and by other I mean everybody, I mean by other I mean the news about per se children, or the news about old age group, or the news from Northeast, right? The other, or the news about farmers, or the news about Dalits. So all of these which can be brought in the ambit of the other. The news which belongs to these categories, or which are about these categories, in whichever manner you categorize, is inherently absent. And the answer to it is, of course, the market. It is because all of these entities are ultimately, these organizations are business empires, and therefore they aim to make profit, right? And the news viewership is often limited. Since it's limited to the metropolitan cities to a large extent, the other gets kind of absent from the Indian news media. So this is one problem. The second problem, as I was saying in the beginning, that it is again in the hands of the very few players as to what kind of ideas they want to propagate. And all of these people, these cross media holders, again, they have this enormous power, right? I say they have this enormous power because they are capable not just to represent what is happening around the world around us, or what is happening around us, but they kind of make news. And they did make news. Now, if you ask me why they make news, of course, then I would give examples like a sensational news often fetches more TRP, and therefore they make sensational news, they make soft news, right? And again, since there are only handful of people, there's no diverse opinions in the market. All we are seeing nowadays in the news is sensational news. So be it the story of Monkey Man of India, if you remember, around 2001. So they were like kind of, the story that a sort of monkey man is kind of roaming around the streets of Delhi. This was, across news channels, across newspapers. When there is no multiple media holdings, then one person is kind of pitching an idea or pitching a news in, say, a television channel, in one television channel. Here what is happening is the same person is pitching the idea in multiple media channels, as in multiple TV channels. At the same point of time, perhaps the company also has magazines, several magazines, so it's propagating the same idea in the magazines. Then it also has a film company, so it's making a film. Of course, Monkey Man, if you remember, there was also a film on Monkey Man. So then what happens that all of these myths, so of course Monkey Man was a myth, or all of these sensational news become so real to us. It becomes like the most important thing we should be bothered about, and therefore actually at that point of time it was hilarious actually, and that's why I refer to this, that in 2001 a sort of monkey man, whosoever it is, roaming around the streets of Delhi became the national crisis. And it was of course hilarious at that point of time. So media makes us decide, therefore, not just what to think, but also how to think about certain issue, right? Sometimes bizarre things such as monkey man becomes real to us. It subtly selects certain aspects of an issue, thus emphasizing a certain cause or a phenomenon with the aid of a narrative form and presentation. Thus, and I underline here, by handling media over to few conglomerates, the power to shape public opinion in many ways has been handed over to those few conglomerates. And this is where it is problematic. Thank you.